I like the sound. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Michael. You here? Hi. Hi, Irene. Hi, Michael. Hi, Irene. All good. Yes, we're here. Hi, Ignacio. Hello, everybody. And this I made only for subscribers. So if somebody can't watch now, they can watch later because it's such a sensitive topic. And why it is sensitive? Because I've done this research all day today. As you may recall, yesterday, I didn't know what the topic should be for today. And then I obviously prepared the today's news, and you're going to get your newsletter soon. But, there's this coalition of the willing and the impotent, and they're still discussing what they're going to do with Russian assets or the profits off of Russian assets. And altogether, the assets are $140 billion. And then they met yesterday and they did the 19th package of sanctions, right? The EU or EU's Russian, or the sanctions on Russia. And I'm thinking, okay, is it really, and so I felt a bit weird as to reporting on them and not really knowing what actually they're doing. Because we've had so many statements, right? And the same as with those sanctions, as allegedly brutal sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft, which altogether, as it got confirmed by three sources and three different factors, that yes, Russia essentially is buying out their own national resources. So they can put all this money into the war and the expanded war. So having known that, thinking, okay, what else we don't know? And then the time was just due to figure out, and that is the topic for today, who is actually sponsoring Russia's aggression. And I can promise you that you will be surprised, to put it this way, because, for me, it's difficult to digest, obviously, as Ukrainian American, but I'm a realist, so I'd rather know the facts, and then we can discuss what's next. All right, so I hope you're ready. We're going to dive today. It's a deep dive. It's our Friday deep dive into this data-driven research, right? And this is as of today, October 24th, 2025. So if anything happens after, this certainly was not included, but this is as recent as of today. Now, when it comes to sources, yes, I used official sources, Financial Times and Reuters and some other think tanks. I also followed up with people who wrote those articles to double check the numbers if they're still relevant. Spoke to Ukrainian sources, emailed back and forth. So altogether, it was all day today just to figure out what is this machine, who sponsors it, how much money actually does Russia make a day, right? And that will be our final take. And then the prognosis. So we're going to finish with how many years can they sustain their war against Ukraine with everything they're doing right now? And if there were any chances for them to expand this war. So if some particles change, can they expand? Do they have to, fold and leave? What would prompt that, right? So first, despite more than 3 years of sanctions, Russia's war economy remains resilient. We know it, right? And why? Because yes, on one hand, we do see those reports that Russians are standing at the gas stations, that they have little to no resources in some areas for citizens. But what we need to understand is that Russian economy for citizens and Russian economy for the elites and the warmongers are two very different things. So today, for instance, Zelensky made this speech to the coalition of the willing in London, and he said, look, we see how Trump's sanctions are already working because Russians are freaking out. They are standing in lines at the gas stations. No, it's not how it's working. They're standing at the gas stations because the resources are taken away from regular Russians and put into war ambitions. And secondly, whatever Trump put out there, in terms of sanctions, has the wind down period. So no sanctions are imposed until November 21st, which is then connected to US assets. And when it comes to Britain, nothing happens until November 28th. So I understand if Zelensky, I'm sure he understands the reality of it, but being fed this wrong messages is not gonna, let us have a good digestion. At least if you use your brain and you kind of like consume actual news, right? So Moscow's ability to fund its aggression depends not only on oil and gas, but on a network of global trade routes, some legal, others deliberately illegal. And today we're going to explore all those routes. We're also going to explore the shadow fleet. We're also going to explore where those ships come from, who sold them. So now, the question isn't who supports Russia politically, it's who still funds it economically, right? So, the sanctions illusion. Now, since 2022, thousands of sanctions have been imposed on Russia. Yes, by European Union, by different countries, by the US, obviously. US meaning the Biden administration. Trump has not imposed anything. He lifted some sanctions when it comes to diamonds and some expensive jewelry trade and all that kind of stuff. But he did impose this that it's not due yet up until a month from now, right? Almost a month from now, which I was referring to, the Rosneft and Lukoil. But altogether, thousands of sanctions on elites, on companies, on shadow fleet operators, on those who buy from Russia, secondary sanctions and stuff. All that was imposed. Yet, as of late 2025, Russia's total international reserves, including foreign currency and gold, are still measured in the hundreds of billions of dollars yearly. Right? And I just want you to put it right next to it. So European Union today says, oh, we have to think, what are we going to do with 140 billion euros off of Russian assets? And they think it's a lot. And this is the number what Russia makes yearly, annually, is over $600 billion as of today, October 24th, 2025. The ruble, that's their currency, while weakened, continues to circulate through non-Western financial channels. Now, Russia continues to earn hundreds of millions of dollars per day from fossil fuel exports, right? Oil, pipeline, gas, LNG, or coal, right? Even after price caps and restrictions, this revenue remains high enough to finance large-scale military operations. So altogether, we're talking about over around $650 million they make per day. Now on that. Every new restriction reshapes the system but rarely stops the flow. Russia has adapted by tightening internal control, consolidating ownership of key industries. And this Trump sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft do help them to do exactly that. This revenue remains reshapes the system, but rarely stops the flow. Now, Russia has adapted by tightening internal control, consolidating ownership of key industries, and leaning on non-Western partners to keep money moving, right? And so, the sponsors, who still trades with Russia? Now, if we do circle back, here's something I want to show you. This is the map, how the trade routes looked in 2022. As you see, I mean, they were shipping straight and didn't have to do any type of shadow fleet operations. Now, to compare, right, this is where they started bypassing Ukraine, as you see here. The orange added lines, this is bypassing Ukraine, but we're still remaining within Europe, right? And this is today's shadow fleet operation that is run worldwide, as you see here. Those are now established routes. Obviously, it takes now what took them 5 to 6 days to deliver is now taking about 30 days. So yes, there are delays, and yes, they're not having much markup on their oil trade, but still, it is still happening. Now, what is the trade with the European Union as of today? Now, the EU has imposed one of the world's most extensive sanctions regimes on Russia. Still, certain trade flows continue under exemptions of essential use logic. So yes, for instance, they impose, like yesterday, they talked about the 19th package of sanctions. Today, they put it in writing and imposed it. And then if you think about fertilizers, there have 6 different options, and they imposed sanctions on 4 of them, but 2 that are mainly bought from Russia are not falling under sanctions because they're now sanction free because of this essential use. So you have to really go deep into this. Now, fertilizers. Russian potash and ammonia have not been fully cut off. European agriculture still relies on them to stabilize food prices. Now, grain. Russia exports wheat and barley into global markets. But here's the trick. About 20% of the grain that Russia is selling, and then I'm going to tell you who's buying this, the 20% of their grain comes from the Ukrainian land that is under occupation. So it is stolen grain. It's not fully Russian grain. So that's what we kind of need to also keep in mind. That's why they want to freeze the conflict where it is, or at least they wanted this before. They want to extend the land under occupation. They have been conducting this human safari type of thing where they kill farmers in Kherson, which is very much known for farmers and for produce. So they do monetize whatever they acquire, whatever falls under their occupation. So this is all per Ukrainian sources. And the grain is stolen from occupied regions like Zaporizhia and Kherson, and then moved through Crimea or third country channels before reappearing under monitored by investigators, but it's before reappearing under different paperwork, right? So they take the grain from stolen land in Ukraine. Crimea has access to the Black Sea, or they use other ports. It's driven to the hub, and in the hub, and I'll tell you what those hubs are, they change the labels. They also change the flags on the shadow fleets and so on, and then it's being sold as not Ukrainian or even Russian grain further. So this is actively alleged by Ukraine and monitored by investigators, but it's difficult to quantify publicly. Now, as to LNG, Russian liquefied natural gas still reaches EU ports, including Spain, Belgium, and France, often via middleman, so to speak, or complex routing. As to metals, nickel, aluminum, palladium, and other strategic inputs have in some cases continued under industrial necessity or delayed phase-out clauses. The same phase-out clause that the Trump administration added to this sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft, also same type of clauses applicable to several metals that are important for EVs and also other industries as well. So then it falls under industrial necessity. So you see, when we talk about fertilizers or grain, it goes under essential use by the EU. And then when it comes to metals, they also have the clause of industrial necessity. So then it's not even touched by sanctions. Now, the bottom line is EU-Russia trade is dramatically smaller than before the full-scale invasion, but it's not zero. Sanctions are selective, not absolute. Now, the United States. Washington's most recent sanctions packages target Russia's two largest oil companies, Lukoil and Rosneft, as we talked about it. These measures are designed to cut off revenue and complicate financing. Now, however, this wind-down period is through November 21st for U.S. assets, through November 28th for U.K. assets. Now, that means existing contracts are temporarily allowed to keep operating on. Now, Western entities can legally disengage in orderly way, but this is standard in sanctions design, at least for United States. For EU, if they do impose sanctions, it's applicable immediately. If for United States, the wind down period is sort of a standard clause. Now, one major point of this tension, though. First of all, what we do see is a hidden buyback. And this is connected to my analysis, and I did put that in writing already, and some leaked sources. So after sanctions announcements, shares of major Russian energy firms like Rosneft and Lukoil went down. I did show this to you yesterday. And then there are strong indicators that the Russian state or state-aligned actors quietly step in and accumulate those shares at discounted prices. Now, there's a strategic effect to that. So, de facto nationalization under sanction cover, right? So, assets that were more commercially held become more state controlled. There's also stability theater, right? Because it prevents visible panic in Russian markets. Because, I mean, obviously they bought the shares, so they're not being dumped elsewhere, or any foreign player can buy them. Now, future leverage also, once pressure eases, the Kremlin, not private shareholders, hold the upside. Now, as a result, and it's also who is buying those shares is Russia's national sovereign reserve, right, or their sovereign fund. The head of that fund, Ukrainian born Kirill Dmitriev, arrived today in New York City, where he met with Witkov. And he was asked, what was the reason for your travel, right? Here's what he had to say. Take a look. It has subtitles in English.
Мы видим, что именно Украина затягивает переговоры. Именно Украина не хочет решать те проблемы, те накопившиеся вопросы, которые необходимо решать. И поэтому также мы будем до наших американских коллег доносить, что Украина, к сожалению, срывает тот диалог, который необходим, и срывает, опять-таки, по просьбе британцев, по просьбе европейцев, которые хотят продолжения конфликта.
Essentially, he's saying Ukraine is the reason why we're not talking. Ukraine is the reason why we're continuing this war. It's all about Ukraine. And then analysts who can't put two things together start saying, oh, look, Russia is so scared. The guy traveled to New York, spoke to Witkov. Oh, my God. No. They're putting together the platform and the fundamental basis for those sanctions to be lifted, because Witkov will be speaking to Trump, who's flying tonight to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, 22 hours flight with Witkov, who has his ear in one way or another. And as we know with Trump, he shares the opinion of the last person he spoke to, like a duck who's born. Like the first thing it sees is mama. So for these reasons, yes, that trip was sort of important. I also put together his itinerary for Russia. It's so awkward. He's going to Malaysia to the Asian Summit, ASEAN, right? And there's just prime ministers of several countries who have deals with, China to close and whatnot. Like Prime Minister Carney is going there, and he's had it already since 10 a.m. this morning. But for Trump, he's leaving tonight. And for instance, to compare, Russia is represented by Vice Prime Minister of Russia, like somebody's name whom I have never heard from. So, and he's holding a very important speech. And then Trump is sort of like there as observer. But what they did, Malaysia and Cambodia, they prepared some type of a document where Trump will be signing and claiming he solved the war between them. So that will be the biggest news on Sunday when the summit begins. Then he goes to Japan to meet this new right-wing prime minister, the first female prime minister of Japan. Then he goes to South Korea, where he's attending a summit. And then after the summit, he has a short meeting with Xi Jinping. So, and I'll put it in writing. Now, back to the topic. So there is this buyback going on. The buyback is completed, so now the sanctions can be lifted. Also, what I saw are documents in China, internal documents, pausing the purchase of Russian oil during this time up until end of November. And just think about it, because if sanctions were to come beginning end of November, why would China suspend the trade now? Because now you can legally trade and buy that cheap ass oil from Russia. You can push them to even lower the prices, because if this all was true, right, and the sanctions were to come by the end of November, why would China not actually push Russia to buy more from them at the moment, knowing that in a month from now, even less than a month from now, they would have to stop, right? No, they have a memo stopping the trade now. So they're not causing anything with U.S. and also Xi Jinping and Trump will talk. So until then, don't think that some trade will be resumed. But starting end of November, what it will start, so they account for sanctions to be lifted. I'll leave you with that. Now, one major point of tension, though, with Western purchases, specifically United States purchasing from Russia, hence sponsoring the war, is uranium. The U.S. banned direct imports of most Russian energy products early in the war, right, by Biden. But experts and lawmakers have repeatedly raised concerns that U.S. utilities remain economically tied to Russian nuclear fuel. It is suggested and widely believed in policy circles that Russian origin enriched uranium still supports part of U.S. civilian nuclear sector, even as fossil fuel trade is barred. Public verifiable accounting of current volumes is limited, obviously not available by the Trump administration, but it all remains politically sensitive, obviously. But there are reputable sources that would say that our civilian nuclear infrastructure is enriched with Russian uranium. Now, so Asia. Asia for Russia is the lifeline. Whatever we discussed up until now was peanuts. Here, China. This is now Russia's single most important economic partner, accounting for a large share of Russia's total trade. Beijing buys discounted Russian crude, coal, metals, and fertilizers, and in return exports machinery, vehicles, electronics, and industrial components back into Russia. So there's also part of it is barter. So, and that's how we came also with, or Russia connected with Iran. The Shahed drones got developed. Now they're produced on Russian soil, but the barter trade is also a very big part of it. Now, smaller and regional Chinese banks plus systems like UnionPay help process payments outside Western channels. So they bypass the SWIFT code. Now, as to India, India became one of the top buyers of Russian crude because it could purchase Russian grades at a steep discount, refine them, and resell products globally. After new U.S. sanctions targeting Russian oil giants, Indian refiners are facing higher legal and financial risk. Officials and traders are signaling that continuing this model is getting harder, and some of these purchases are expected to slow, especially if those sanctions were to hit Lukoil and Rosneft. The exact long-term drop in Russian oil flows to India is still playing out, right? So we don't really know what's going to be. Now, also, Turkey, Malaysia, and Vietnam, and others. And Turkey is part of NATO, okay? These are hubs that I mentioned earlier. Turkey, Malaysia, where Trump is literally flying to right now, and Vietnam are hubs that are repeatedly flagged by Western officials and investigators as re-export routes. So essentially, Russian origin metals, fertilizers, and in some cases grain stolen from Ukraine can be relabeled and then re-enter global supply chains with altered paperwork. So together, Russia's Asian and friendly partners provide hundreds of millions of dollars per day in a hard currency export earnings. Next will be Middle East. Michael says, so the sanctions are mostly for just minor inconveniences. Yes. Yeah. I mean, they all have to be fully aware that there's this whole trade going on. And wait till you hear who sold the ships for the Shadow Fleet that EU is sanctioning. Remember, like every single package of sanctions includes the sanctioning Shadow Fleet. The US is sanctioning Shadow Fleet. And my question was always, but I never had time to research, who the hell provided that Shadow Fleet in this masses, right? I show you the routes. Like there's just, it's a big operation. So, but first, Middle East. UAE serves as a financial and logistics hub, right? So we know that Turkey, Malaysia, Vietnam is a production hub. They do physically relabel, put flags, put this, put that, right? So hide the origin. Now, UAE is the financial logistics hub. Russian money, gold, and high-value goods often move through Emirati free zones and trading companies. Now, Saudi Arabia and OPEC plus coordination. Remember when a couple of days ago, Trump administration said, oh, the gas prices are so much lower in 13 states, they're below $3. And this is because Trump is doing so well. And I said, no, it's because OPEC plus is dumping so much oil and lowering the price and taking away share from Ukraine, from the U.S. Providers, right? So, and then if you think about it, China stopped purchasing from Russia for a month, and they can purchase all this extra OPEC plus oil that has been dumped already. So that works very conveniently for them. So they're still restocking on everything, from oil to uranium to everything. So now, Russia and Saudi Arabia coordinate oil production policy through OPEC plus by jointly managing supply to keep global oil prices elevated, often in the $80 per barrel price range. They help guarantee that Russia continues to earn substantial oil income even if it sells lower volumes. This is framed publicly as market stability, but in practice, it supports Russia's war budget. Now, as to Qatar, Qatar aligns with major gas exporters on pricing and market strategy. While not openly defying Western sanctions, policy coordination in global LNG and energy pricing indirectly benefits Moscow by keeping hydrocarbon revenues strong. Also, don't forget, this would be another deep dive, but when the war began, like the full-scale invasion began, the war began in 2014 against Ukraine, but the full-scale invasion in 2022, the Russian elites dumped so much money into Saudi sovereign fund, so much so that the Saudi foreign or sovereign fund was the biggest purchaser of Twitter. And I'll let you connect the dots with propaganda from there on. This is 2022. Now, as to agriculture, there is a sanctions loophole. So Western allies have tried to restrict dual-use equipment, for example, farm equipment that can also support the Russian military logistics base. But they have generally avoided sweeping sanctions on Russian fertilizer and grain because that would spike global food prices, especially in the Middle East and Africa. Now, so this thing does two things. It lets Russia present itself as indispensable food supplier, even though they're selling 20% of what they're selling is stolen from Ukraine. It also creates space for Russia to monetize agricultural output, including output from occupied Ukrainian land. Now, Ukrainian officials, investigators, and open source analysts say that the grain taken from occupied Ukrainian regions is being exported under Russian branding. Public estimates of how large the share is vary widely, and independent verification is difficult. But I reviewed the claims as high as 20%. That figure is not yet publicly confirmed because one say 20, one say 18, one say up to 50. So, but on average, that's what Ukrainian sources are saying. Now, as to who sponsors Russian shadow fleet, right? Because when we look at this map, and it's a very well-established route at this point. It's huge. And all these ships are the current ships. It's a snapshot. So the route is very established. So how big is the fleet, right, to satisfy this need, so to speak? Now, the Kremlin and who sponsors, right, the shadow fleet? The Kremlin and state energy giants, right? So Russia itself is the primary sponsor. And here are two companies that were always buying the ships for the shadow fleet. I kind of mentioned them today earlier. It's Lukoil and Rosneft, that they're essentially privatizing by buying out the shares the past 2 days. So they finance, charter, or indirectly control hundreds of vessels through shell companies and middle guys. These tankers move oil outside the G7 price cap system, keeping Moscow's war revenues flowing. Now, who sells those tanks, right? Or shadow fleet? Up to 60% of this shadow fleet ships originated in Europe. They sold by Greek and other Western owners to obscure buyers after sanctions began. Many were reflagged under lenient jurisdictions and now carry Russian crude. So part of the fleet's foundation was unintentionally built through Western asset sales. And here are the numbers. Greece. Greek ship owners are the single biggest source of tankers that ended up in Russia's shadow fleet. Investigations show that they sold about 127 tankers which is roughly 55% of all Western-owned vessels that later moved Russian oil outside the price cap. This was reported by Follow the Money. They used several sources for that. Also, Greek-linked ships also continue to carry a large share of Russian oil legally, even today. This was reported by Telegraph. This was reported by Reuters. This was reported by several outlets. But in Europe, so we never know about it. United Kingdom. UK-based ship owners sold around 22 tankers that are now part of the Russian shadow fleet. Germany. German companies sold about 11 tankers that later joined the shadow fleet. Norway. They sold 8 tankers that are now moving Russian oil under OPEC ownership flags. Belgium. They sold, they say multiple vessels, but what I found is at least 5 into this network, profiting from offloading aging ships that otherwise would be near scrap value. So they sold for very cheap, right? United States. U.S. ship owners are also among Western sellers whose vessels later turned up in Russia's shadow fleet. These sales helped Russia acquire aging tankers that now run sanctioned crude. And just to put it into perspective, right? Remember recently I posted a tweet from July 11, 2024, and it was mentioned that Biden signed an agreement on ICE collaboration, ICE Pact. And I said it has nothing to do with immigration, it was icebreakers. And those icebreakers and tankers, right, that later were sold out and were this part of the fleet. When Biden started targeting this question, I was personally on this call. It was off the record call. At this point, it doesn't matter because the whole thing is already dismantled. But it was a call with NATO officials and Pentagon and the White House National Security. And they talked about the icebreakers. And I said, what if our Arctic is invaded? How are we going to go about it? And then what does Canada have? What does US have? What does EU have? And they figured out that in order to withstand Russia's invasion, we're not even talking about China. And China at that point declared itself a near Arctic state and started using that route, the trade route, for their military ships, by the way, bypassing Canadian northern border. And this is summer of last year. So they said, well, we need on average about 75 icebreakers, right? The tankers. And the question was, how many do we have? Well, in US, we have 3, but none of them are functioning. And in Finland, well, they have 7. None of them are, well, we don't even know if they're functioning. And that's when Biden put together all this thing where we're going to use like what Finland knows and their intel and produce in the United States. And then some parts will be also produced in Finland, and there will be Canada involved. And this was the ICE Pact that he put together, that by whatever year at that point, we will be capable to withstand pressure. Because at that point, we got caught with our pants down, right? So now you saw that Trump met with Finnish president, right, Stubb. That's when he said, oh, we're going to do tankers, right? This was recent. And I think they agreed to purchase, 7 tankers from Finland. This was the number. I think, is that the 7 that Finland said they had a year ago that are questionable if they're functioning or not? But having heard the actual numbers a year ago that we need about 75, like, what are we talking about here? But I digress. So, total scale, at least 230 aging tankers from Europe and the US have flowed into Russia's gray shadow fleet since 2022. Sellers made an estimated $6 billion from these deals. So, all the stuff that you see here floating, we gave it one way or another. Now, why this matters, though? These aren't Russian-built ships. Much of the fleet was literally assembled from Western-owned vessels sold off after the full-scale invasion. After being sold, the tankers are reflagged, often under weak registries like Gabon, Liberia, and Cook Islands, in short, through some fake policies, and then used to move Russian oil outside G7 rules. And ultimately, they end up funding the war. Now, there are also non-Western shipping middlemen, obviously. So firms based in India, UAE, Seychelles, and Mauritius manage and operate large portions of this fleet. So that's why you see those islands defending Russian stance. If you think about UN votes and those tiny islands always vote pro-Russia, now you know why. So, for instance, Gatek Ship Management, which is in India, one of the biggest operators of Russian oil tankers. Two Rivers, formerly Coal Energy, in Dubai and Azerbaijan, they facilitate trade and shipping logistics for Russian crude. But all that is also in Seychelles, Mauritius, and all that, right? So, flags of convenience and fake insurance. What's that? The fleet relies on permissive registries in Liberia, Gabon, and Cook Islands to hide ownership. So it's essentially like like you have offshore companies, right? So you have offshore insurances. So some tankers also carry fraudulent or low-grade insurance, as uncovered by Norwegian authorities investigating fake certificates used for Russian oil shipments. Now, there's also ongoing global enablers. Ports, insurers, brokers that look the other way, plus weak maritime transparency rules collectively sustain the system. It's not a single sponsor, but a network of opportunistic actors profiting from loopholes and sponsoring the murder. Here's the summary. Russian shadow fleet is financed by the Kremlin, built with ships sold by Western owners, managed by non-Western middle guys, and shielded by maritime systems. Now, it's not one nation's fleet, it's a global industry of convenience keeping Russia's oil and its war afloat. All are involved, tiny kind of bit. Now, the money trail, right? We always have to follow the money. According to the sourcing, where yesterday I reported that there was a leak from Kremlin, which was sent to several people, then it was verified, and today it got verified and all that kind of stuff. So Russia's defense budget at this point surpasses $260 billion, which is 12% of their GDP. If you compare it to Ukraine, Ukraine's total GDP is $190 billion in good times. So this is an extraordinary level of militarization for a major economy. And this is why when Zelensky says, oh, they're so scared of sanctions, look at them, they're standing waiting for gas. Yes, because their government sees their people. Like, essentially, think of Russia as a open-air jail. Because they don't care that their people will be cold and hungry and not moving anywhere, and the gas prices are off the hook and there is no gas. Essentially, Russians are used to it. In Soviet Union, people were standing for blocks, right, trying to get a bottle of milk, and then when this was their turn, then they learned that the milk ran out, right? And they have one kind of cheese and one kind of sausage, and then you get those little talons, right, little tickets that you go and pick up your little sausage once a month, right? They're used to it, and that's exactly where they headed. So you can't judge the stance of Russia by the way the average Russian Joe Schmo lives, or Ivan in this case. No, you have to see where the money is allocated. They do have it. As you know, there's a whole system sponsoring it. It's not going to citizens, it's going to wars. And then the point is, how big is this war now? So where the money comes from is in simplified terms, right? So we can all remember. Oil, gas, and gas revenue, right? So still hundreds of millions of dollars per day, supported by OPEC plus pricing discipline and Asian buyers. Then agricultural and fertilizer exports protected globally from the harshest sanctions because of food security fears. Then metals, coal, arms sales, and other commodities, right? This is the barter. In other words, Russia is not running this war off of savings alone. It's actively funding it through ongoing international trade. Now, here's the case study. How long can Russia sustain this war? And Russian planners, what we need to understand, they base their calculation on 3 pillars, right? One is energy. Shadow fleet of older tankers and insurance workarounds keeps oil flowing under Western price caps, right? And it's not touched by any sanctions. And now there are buying the shares of their national resources, right? So it literally becomes the Kremlin's force. One pillar, right? Oil and energy altogether. Second pillar is Asia. Willing buyers in China, India, Turkey is allocating towards Asia, and others continue to give Russia revenue streams and access to industrial imports. And because those tiny islands, and also not so tiny, Malaysia, Vietnam, right, they're part of this. So they're now part of those hubs, right? So they make money off of those hubs. Now, this is connected to their economy because these ports employ a lot of people because they have to relabel and put the different flags and hide the origin that is coming from Russia and whatnot. So they're now involved and very much interested to keep this going. Then market capture, right? That's the third pillar. Kremlin tightens its grip on key companies and sectors so wartime funding can be forced, not negotiated, right? And that's why if you buy the shares of those public companies, now you are the decision maker. Remember last week, Friday, we talked about BlackRock and Blackstone. That's exactly what they did, right? How did we come up to this or with this solution that, or the idea that they pretty much decide what we make, what we spend, what do we spend on our rent or whatever you're paying out, right? Because they're the biggest share owners. They make decisions. Remember that example that they own both Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And if Pepsi is fighting Coca-Cola with flavors or pricing or bottles or whatever, they make money because they make money off of conflict, right? They're not buying a horse and putting everything on a horse that they win the race. They own the whole freaking competition. And every horse makes money, regardless who wins. And this is exactly what Russia is doing with it. Now, do you think BlackRock is not in Russia? Yes, it is. BlackRock is partial owner of Rosneft. It's listed as a Western unknown company. But if you really go inside the weeds, you understand that this is BlackRock. So, and don't forget that BlackRock takes Western assets, our assets, invests them in Asia. And that's how we tied to China's policy at this point. Because if they decide something that will knock us out, we're knocked out because all our assets are tied with that. So in Asia and China, right, specifically, is sponsoring Russia. And so we tied with Asia, and Asia is tied with Russia. And this is how we're hurting ourselves, essentially. You know, everybody makes money off it. So if these pillars hold, and if food and fertilizer remain largely unsanctioned, Moscow can continue financing a large-scale war effort for years, not months. So every sanction builds another loophole. So by allowing fertilizer, grain, and some LNG to keep moving, by leaving uranium and nuclear fuel ties in a gray zone for us in the United States, and by failing to block internal market maneuvers like those state buybacks, the international community is still enabling the system it condemns. Now, the Kremlin has turned scarcity into leverage. It profits from higher global energy prices, portrays itself as essential to global food security, and quietly absorbs private industry into state hands, right? So, and this is my takeaway here, that sanctions make statements, but trade funds wars. And we can talk about coalition of willing and impotent and hogs and Slavo Ukraini, and everybody gets up and greets Zelensky. And look at this video. Oh my God, everybody respects him so much. Every single leader got up. Did you see this viral video? And they shook his hand. You are sponsoring this. Do you think Zelensky doesn't know? Yeah, he does. And now imagine this composure of going and meeting these clowns, fully knowing you sold ships for the Shadow Fleet. You closed both eyes to fake insurance. You participated. You profit off of it. And you sit here and dare to tell that you're here helping me and whatever. And the hugs with Macron and all of this. But France still buys oil indirectly from Russia. And by the way, you know what EU did, but they didn't tell you? They told you about the 19th package of sanctions. Okay, they didn't ban Russians and Russian visas from EU because they want to support cultural exchange and tourism, and ruble doesn't stink in that case. Okay. Do you know what they didn't tell you? That current contracts that European companies have to buy oil are extended till January 1st, 2028. New contracts are forbidden to be closed from January 1st, 2026. They still have 2 months plus to even get new contracts for another 2 years. This is Europe, where Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, the Baltic states, are mobilizing their army, are planning evacuation inside the country, are looking into bunkers because Russia can't afford expanding the war. But they want the trade to continue till January 2028. Make that make sense. So, yeah. Michael says, we tend to link the economy with the people in the West, but we're slowly moving in direction of Russia's economy where the people don't matter. Right. And that's the whole story, right? That's exactly, where people, I'm all for this no kings, right? But if we think about it, we do have a king, for instance, in England, King Charles III. And just imagine if King Charles would dismantle half of Buckingham Palace, which he can probably. I mean, he was born there, he lived there, he's a king. I don't think he would remain king for too long. There would be such an uproar. There would be some preservation, this preservation, that. He would be declared disgusting and crazy, and probably having dementia, and we should defund the royalty, and there would be protests. I don't think he could just dismantle, Buckingham Palace or anything they have. So we're past the king stage. Did you read the interview with Amy Barrett, whatever, right? Amy Cohen Barrett or something? The Supreme Court judge, where it was released this morning, where she says, well, I have to admit that Trump is above the courts at this point. He's above the Supreme Court. And I'm like, who gave him immunity? You gave him immunity. Yeah, you gave essentially Biden immunity, fully known that Biden is not going to do anything with that. And Biden should have used his immunity to cancel out that immunity. That would have been a baller move. That would be Dark Brandon, but he didn't. All he gave us was a speech that I'm above that, I'm not going to use it, I don't think this is right. But he could have totally played the cards right and used the immunity to declare the immunity inefficient. Because it allows you to do stuff in favor of national security, right? That would have been total in favor of national security. But now we're dealing with this. And this guy, if you ask anybody in Africa, if you ask anybody in Eastern Europe, we know how it starts. When somebody starts planting the roots inside the chair, so the chair becomes this podium and they never leave. And when they leave, it's usually feet forward, but then they're also heirs planted. And today, do you see the articles in Guardian when they discuss, is Eric Trump the heir? No. If you were to ask me, I think Ivanka Trump is the heir. But yeah. So when they say Trump 2028, it doesn't have to be Donald Trump. And the whole ballroom, and let's stop talking about ballroom construction. It's the bunker construction. Google what happened with Hitler in 1938. He also got a huge ballroom, which actually was the bunker underneath. It's very much on brand. Ballroom doesn't cost $300 million, right? Because first it was 200 million, 250, now it's 300. Some report $350 million. Ballroom doesn't cost that much, but bunker does. And the bunker, bigger than the entire White House, and sponsored by all this tech people. And those companies certainly will be involved in ensuring that this bunker has some capabilities. Let's call it what it is. It's the bunker construction. Yeah, with the fancy little ballroom upstairs. It's not the ballroom construction. That's why all the photography has been banned. You literally have FBI standing there and not even allowing tourists to come to the ellipse. Why? So the world's moral consensus against Russia is undercut by the continued flow of fertilizer, LNG, nuclear fuel inputs, and that may still be sourced from Russia, and Kremlin managed the consolidation of its oil giants. Now, until the West confronts the agriculture of its own dependency, Russia's aggression remains not just funded, but profitable. Uncomfortable truth, right? So, in this case, unless we hear that they have targeted agriculture, I wouldn't expect too much when they say shadow fleet, when they say this, when they say that, and it's all a lot of talk and little action. Because if they make over $600 billion a year, it's more than half a trillion. And EU is sitting on their behinds negotiating how they're going to allocate 100 profits off of 140 billion euros of Russian assets. I mean, what are we talking about? Russia makes a year more than all those assets combined. So, and that's why we do such deep dives, and that's why they're not public, because Russians no. But we have to dive deep, and we have to understand what's going on. And yes, it is upsetting, and yes, it's aggravating, but I see it the way where, okay, if we dive deep and we understand this, we saw the routes, we saw this, we saw that, okay, we know what is true. So you become less reactive. Because for me personally, when I'm clueless and I, get like, oh, he said that, she said that, they said that, I'm like, oh, and I start hoping. And you hope and you get disappointed, and you hope and you get disappointed, and that's what gets you out of the system. That's what the anxiety is for. That's why they use the clickbait. That's why they use the fear mongering, so you will be watching the stupid news. So, but once you did understand that, you look for clues. Okay, if I hear about agriculture, okay, that kind of makes sense. All right. But if I hear this, that kind of doesn't make sense. So I just believe information is calming, right? Even if it's disappointing, but we kind of know that nothing moves in this case. So we'll see what will happen. For Ukraine, essentially, it's such a great combination of, I guess, the smarts and the luck that worked out, and the unity of people. Nobody ran away, and Zelensky stayed and started fighting and not running away like Assad or anybody. So that combination altogether helped Ukraine sustain this. Because just think about it. 3 years ago, Ukraine, where's Ukraine army? Arms production? No. The rockets that Russia uses to bomb the city of Kharkiv, and they write on it, returning home. You know why? Because they were produced in the city of Kharkiv. My whole family is professors, engineers, and all that, tied to this, because in Soviet Union times, Kharkiv specifically was the city producing those missiles, and they shoot them to kill Kharkiv people, kids, and all that, and they write on it in Russian, returning home. So, but at some point they'll run out of it. And then what they're gonna do? And if they're gonna expand, what they're gonna do? So, we just have to monitor it. Now, next deep dive will be on the Arctic. It's long overdue. I want to know who's using those trade routes. What's China's interest to be a player there? I want to see dive deep into case studies. Let's say, okay, Trump starts collaborating with China and Russia in Alaska, the drill baby drill situation. What will what will Canada do, right? How's that going to impact Canada? Because now you see Trump fighting with Canada. It has nothing to do with that stupid ass video. Please, he talks about the tweet and the video and the noise. Don't fall for it. This was just the time to start cutting ties with Canada. You know why? Because both Trump and Carney are headed to the same Malaysia summit and then the same South Korea summit, and Xi Jinping will be there. And Trump wants to have Xi Jinping's attention about the Alaska and the Arctic, and he doesn't want Carney in it. Feel me? Because Russia doesn't want Canada in it. So, all that is a precursor. And when he said, "Oh, Reagan, they lied," this is for the uneducated and easily impressed. So, that is something to be watched. So anyway, I'll dive into the Alaska situation. But what we have to remember that in a week from now will be the last Friday of the month, which is our very first Zoom of the month. And I will invite our members and also those who submitted footage from No Kings. We're going to talk about No Kings. And then there, since it's really off the record, there will be no recording. There will be no notes, nothing. So please show up. We'll meet at 6. So like West Coast can also kind of make it. See it as a happy hour, take a beverage, snack, whatever. We can see each other. You can also turn your camera off. There I will share what I know from the pilgrimage of European leaders to the White House and what they plan to do with the NATO bases. Because I saw the memos. So we're going to talk about that. And then the week from there, so first Friday in November will be the Alaska Deep Dive. Okay? All right. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm sorry that it's not too happy of a news, but we learn and we get smarter, right? Hopefully also calmer a little bit. And the newsletter will come in a second. It has some interesting stuff in it. More on that Lukoil, whatever, but you already know. And what else is there? Or that NBA poker thing is in it. And a bunch of other stuff. There's some interesting thing as well. Michael says the thirst of oil is going to get us one way or another, even in the Arctic, right? Yeah, also, good. Let me show you one thing. So with Venezuela, right? I mean, today Trump sanctioned Colombia's president, right? Petro and all, and his family, and it's oil thing. But it also, Irene, thank you for today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being the part of Honest Plus. I appreciate you. Now, what I want to talk about Venezuela. So essentially, when Putin and Trump met in the Arctic, and it's widely discussed in diplomatic sources when I was at the UN on the 80 the week, and so essentially Putin says, hey, you gotta do something to Venezuela because like there's such a big oil reserve right next to you, and here's a dictator and whatever. Meanwhile, Russia is holding Venezuela's gold reserve that they're supposed to return, right? They're holding it because they helped Maduro stay in power in 2009 by sending Wagner mercenaries, right? So that type of discussion is overdue. So Trump starts bombing those boats. And there's also, he's partnering, companies that own the fishermen boats, they also send them. And they kind of like, there's at least a rumor that US is notified whom to bomb. Because like, if you think about it, why did we bomb 10 boats? Like if a couple of them were bombed, why is the third one actually going that or taking the route? Or we go into Caribbean, and we also in the Pacific bombing a boat. And so there is at least some type of rumor that somebody's partnering. But again, I didn't do a deep dive there, so I digress. Now, yesterday, Trump flies B-1, B-2 bombers and also a bunch of drones off the coast of Venezuela. And Maduro's freaking out. I mean, he has some people, but he says, I have millions of soldiers. He doesn't. And he starts calling Putin, like, help me, right? Start negotiating. But for Putin right now, he can't start negotiating because this whole Lukoil and Rosneft, they have to make it look like US and Russia are fighting now. You can't start negotiating, right? And so Maduro goes live today, and in the broadcast, he starts screaming in English, and I'll show you this video. I don't know if you saw it, let me know. But he starts screaming, peace, peace, no war, no war. And it's shown on Russian television on RT channel, hence the Russian subtitles. Take a look.
Not war, not war, not war. Just peace, just peace, just peace. Forever, forever, forever. Peace forever. No crazy war. No a la guerra loca. No crazy war, no crazy war. Please, please, please. Yes, peace. Peace forever. Peace forever. Victory forever. Defeats.
That sounds pretty desperate. Because, I mean, it's not a good timing for Putin to step in. Yeah, he's going to play negotiator, but at this point, no. If they were meeting in Hungary, that would be a different story. but now he has to now withstand the pressure that's on him now. On the other hand, Ukraine is just being bombarded daily, and it looks like Gaza at this point. When they're bombing Kherson, remember I told you that they take the grain from Kherson? It's very big moneymaker for them. And the farmers and the people don't want to be under Russian occupation. They keep singing Ukrainian songs and all that kind of stuff. So look what they've done to Kherson today, all day. So essentially, they're just flattening the city. It's like all day, one house by, like, it's like it's insane. But again, now we know why, because they need that oil thing. I can also show you Macron saying it today, the coalition of the willing, that Ukraine will be supported here.
Capabilities, drones and anti-drone system. I want to confirm, Volodymyr, that we will deliver in the days to come additional Aster missiles, new training programs and new Mirage, and we will, with some other colleagues,
Okay, well, new Mirage, new anti-system, because you see what happens here with Kherson. That's why everything that is thrown at them, they're catching, because you see there's literally no air defense. Like, you bomb, like the same as Gaza. That's why it looks like Aleppo, Gaza, because there's no defense system. There's no aerial anything. So, you know, it is what it is. But anyway, on a good note, I'll see you next Friday. And what I really would love for you to do, if you can do it now, that'd be great. If you go to ONEST Network, let me actually open this here and I copy paste. ONEST Plus, just checking. Yes, that's what it is. So I can guide you here if you can. So I can just send you the, here we go. So here's a link. I don't know if it comes up as a link. I can also put it here as a banner so you can type it in case this doesn't work. So if you go to honestnetwork.com/honestplus, on that website, and I can show this here. Wait a second, because I needed to send you the Zoom link. Otherwise, I won't be able to do so. Let me just quickly share it. Okay, so here we go. Okay, I think you can see it. Yes. So if we're here, blah, 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 blah. Okay, submit your form, this one. So essentially, this is where this thing will open, and it shows you, welcome to Honest Community. Does it show it here? Yes. No, it didn't. It dropped me. Okay, okay, it opened, I think, in another one. All right, so let's see here. Okay, wait a second. Share screen and this one. Okay, now we have it. All right, so when you click on submit your email or form, it's the same link. It will open this, and then here you just need your YouTube username so I know you're subscribed, and then your name or your initial and email. Main thing is email. And if you want to submit like a question you want us to talk about next week, or a topic, or anything, so I can do proper research for next week for our Zoom meeting, this is important. So main thing, leave your email, right? And the username and email is important, so I can send you the Zoom link. All right, and this is the website that's here. So it would be super good if you could do this. And then I'll see you on the Zoom tomorrow, because there's no way for me to get your email. It came up as a link. Okay, perfect. So when it's as a link, just tap, there's like submit email or questions, the same form. Just literally just your email, because it never gives me anywhere email. You know, and I had to ask YouTube for permission to have like a different form for email gathering. Okay, so once again, thank you for being here. Have a peaceful weekend. On Sunday, and this is for our Honest Plus members, you'll be first receiving access to an interview with Cora Newman. Dr. Cora Newman, she's a Montana senator. She also worked for U.S. State Department, and she's the founder of the Global First Ladies Alliance, GFLA. And we talk about the first ladies. We met at the UN. We connected. We discussed that we're going to do an interview. She worked with Biden. She worked with Michelle Obama. She worked with every first lady rather than, I guess, this one, because, I mean, where? East Wing is gone. But anyway, and she works with all the first ladies in Africa, with Zelenska, with all. So we talk about the soft power, also about the first gentleman. And then we shifted. And I said, look, what gives you hope these days? And she went like in a very straightforward way, talking about authoritarianism and how women will be oppressed and what can we do and what will help us not to be numb. So it's very personable. So this Sunday, you'll get notification that you have new video to watch. It's about 40 minutes, but I really, really recommend you to watch it because it's so really, she was so straightforward and so smart and so wise also. And then later, a few days later, it will be open for others to watch. Okay? All right. Now, we're really done. So thank you again for being here. Have a peaceful weekend. On Sunday, you'll see that new video. Your email will gonna come in a second. And I think next Sunday, we have new videos of two British French artists. And I interviewed them earlier. So you'll have that as well next Sunday. All right. So have a good evening, and I'll see you on Monday. And I'll see you, really, really see you next Friday. Okay. Have a good night.